Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear viewers, this is another episode of Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, and in this episode I'd like to talk about a young couple actually walked along a path. Actually, I've forgotten the name of it now for the moment, but it's actually from Beijing to Bukhara, the Silk Road. Okay, they didn't go all the way and they didn't walk all the way, but they went quite a long way. Okay, and as they went along the Silk Road, they were Chinese, they were great, they were in the university, and what they were doing, they were architects, and they were looking at the architecture along the Silk Road and meeting some people as they went along, and they were trying to come up with material to enter for the King Faisal Award for Architecture through the university. There were, and also photography. There was individual efforts and there were team efforts. And this couple, as they went along the Silk Road, they were impressed by what they saw from the Islamic architecture. And they met some Muslims and they wrote their reports and submitted them, and one of them won an individual prize and another one won team prize. And they wanted to become Muslim because of their experiences on the Silk Road, and it was suggested to them that they embraced Islam in Saudi Arabia, and they did. And my wife and I got to meet them, and they were very talented. The young man, he actually was taking Arabic in the institute in King Saud University, and the girl was actually acting as an artist because they were both artistic as well. One did oil paintings, one did watercolour paintings, so they didn't have a conflict there. But we got friendly with them, and we used to go out into the desert with them. You know about our trips on Thursdays, for instance. They used to come with us many, many times, and we would walk around and basically enjoy ourselves. And also we went to Apur, as I mentioned. They came with us, and he took quite a few pictures of the market, the Thursday market in Khamis Mashayat, and so on and so forth. And in Saudi Arabia there was some rocks, outcrop of rocks, in which there was, if you like, rock art, and it goes back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And he took some photographs of these and he wrote it up for his English studies. And the instructor was kind of surprised because he hadn't known about these things. But this is the sort of interest that they had. And they were very interested in Islam, and they were living in Saudi, as I say. And we used to talk to them and meet them and socialize with them. And one day they invited us for what was the Chinese New Year. And this shows the type of relationship that we had with them, because they told us that the Chinese New Year is a typical time for when the families get together, and they looked on us as their sort of spiritual parents in a way. Okay, alhamdulillah. So that was a nice feeling, and it was the first time I'd seen this flame cooking by Chinese at home. They light the vegetables and the flame shoots up about 2 feet in the air. I was a little bit apprehensive about it, but they weren't. They'd done it before. And they were both turned out to be good cooks. So they had quite a lot going for them. And I don't really know what happened to them after we left, but they seemed to have their own lives made up and were moving forward. Alhamdulillah. So that was another sort of cultural aspect that we came across, because they would come to our house and we would go to their house quite often. And that's basically their story. And the Silk Road is actually probably one of the few real tours left to do, because I think it's only once a year that the bus goes from Bukhara to Beijing, and you have to book it some time in advance if you want to go on it. I know it was written up in the Saudi Aramco World magazine by the photographers that and journalists that they went on it, And also, we ourselves were at one end of it when we went to Bukhara, because that's where the trading domes still are. And at that time, there was a Japanese-Chinese joint team actually going to do a second trip down the Silk Road. I don't know if you saw it the first time, but it was on the TV, and it was a really wonderful series. Unfortunately, I only got the ones in Japanese because I was abroad at the time, and when they wanted to get copies, I couldn't get them from the UK, and they actually ended up getting them from China. But it's all in Japanese, but no translation. Although the Chinese couple, they could read Japanese and they could tell me what it was saying, so it wasn't as bad as it sounds, perhaps. But they were very good photographs, and it was good photography, and it was very entertaining and interesting. And the history, of course, is tremendous. So anyway, that was that side of it. So that was another cultural aspect in Saudi Arabia, that we actually met Chinese people who were Chinese Muslims, and how they came to Islam and then living Islam, alhamdulillah. So there was a wonderful opportunity to meet people from different countries, different backgrounds, and so on and so forth. And this was happening all the time. We would meet Palestinians, Egyptians, Lebanese, Turks, and so on. And some of these friendships have lasted even to today. That even though I've been back from Saudi Arabia since 1997, I'm still in touch with, for instance, a Turkish brother and other brothers in Saudi, and even in touch with some of the Saudis that I once worked with, who are now at the retiring age in the universities, of course. So, alhamdulillah, it's been a good journey and a long, interesting life, and I would like to think rewarding. And when you still maintain contact with some of these people and they tell you that they still remember you, or that you're still remembered in the university, then you feel that you did in fact contribute. And one of the reasons for going to Saudi Arabia was in fact to contribute to a developing country. I went there in 1974, which was only a year after the oil was actually being raised from the ground in real quantities and in real values, and it was a good time to be there. But by 1980 things were changing slightly. But if you think of all the changes that took place in Saudi Arabia over a period of time, because they had the money, they could change the docks, the ports, the airports, the transport system in general, in terms of the roads, in terms of airlines, in terms of communications, in terms of health, and in terms of education. All of these things were transformed in a very, very short period of time. And to put things in perspective, one person once said to me, "Why is it that the Saudi drivers are so bad?" And I said, well, you have to think back to when we first had cars in the UK. There used to be a person walking along with a red flag in front of the car, and it couldn't do more than 3 or 4 miles an hour. I said, but in Saudi Arabia, where they drove on the desert, there were no traffic signs, no limitations. They could just do as they like. And they went from the camel direct to the American cars, they say. So what did you expect? They didn't have all this ingrained discipline that we had in the UK. And in fact, my brother-in-law told me an interesting little story. He said a Saudi came out and went to a big American car and got in it and started it up. It was automatic. He engaged the gear and stalled it. He switched it off, started again, engaged the gear, stalled it. Did it again and stalled it. He got out, kicked the car, walked over to my brother-in-law, and he said to him, you know, he said, the best form of transport for us Saudis is still the camel. So it sort of puts it in perspective, really. They may not even have liked driving cars in some ways, even though there was the comfort there, but they were happier on the camel, perhaps. But it does show that there is a difference, and there is a way of life, and there is an upbringing, and there's a discipline, and you can't get away from it. The discipline should be there. You can't go from one thing to another on an arbitrary basis. You should, in fact, know why you're doing it. It should be reasoned, okay? If you talk about driving a car over the desert, of course it's a lot different to driving it in a crowded, narrow lane. There has to be a discipline. But the discipline doesn't come from driving in the desert. Discipline comes from the person that's driving the car, whether it's in the desert or anywhere else. Even in the desert, I've seen cars stuck in the sand. And I've seen Land Rovers or Jeeps or cars similar to that trying to tow them out. Okay? So it doesn't mean that you can just do as you like, where you like, when you like. There has to be discipline, and that's true for all of our lives. We have to impose the discipline that Islam imposes on us, on ourselves, and then perhaps we'll be better human beings, okay? And then perhaps we can contribute more to the society around us, inshallah. I'm going to stop there, and inshallah we'll see you again in another part after a short break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Continuing with Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, and this is another part in this ongoing story, and this time I think I would like to talk about another relationship, but this time in Saudi Arabia. And as I said before, that I used to go to Jeddah or Mecca, where the brother-in-law was with his family, for certain times of the year, like Ramadan, Eids. And one day whenever we used to go to a local mosque if we were in Jeddah, when they moved to Jeddah. So I went to this local mosque, and the Imam said to me, "I've seen you coming here a few times." He said, "Why don't you give a talk to the community? I can translate it for you." So I said, "Okay." So after the prayer, sat down, and he announced that I'd give a short talk, and so I spoke a bit about Islam, about my understanding of Islam, how I came to Islam, things like that. And he translated it. And what came out of this was some sort of interaction with the community, because now these people were all local people. They were, I won't quite say neighbours of my brother-in-law, but they were living fairly close to him in the same district, same area, and they knew the kids in general. Some of their kids knew the brother-in-law's kids. So they weren't altogether strangers, and they would make a point of coming and talk to me from time to time. And so, you know, you made sort of friendships just through this basis. And there were a few expatriates there, and even one or two who had actually embraced Islam, even in that mosque. So in essence, it was quite a good get-together. But it's after you talk like that that people actually will talk to you. If you just go into the mosque, not so many people will talk. They'll say Salaam alaikum, but they won't actually stand and talk. And now people would stand and talk, and they'd greet me on the way, and we'd walk in together and things like this. And it became much more friendly then. You become a part of the society just by interacting with them like this, alhamdulillah. Whereas before you feel like a bit of outsider. You come in, you attend the mosque, and you go away, and you don't really speak to anyone. So, you know, where is the interaction with the community? Where is the community with you? You know, and of course it doesn't exist. You're individual. But once you're basically introduced to the community, then things change, and you would expect it to. You expect them to be a little bit more friendly, but you have to make an effort too. It's not just a one-sided thing, is it? You can't expect people to come to you and talk to you just like that if you're not going to talk back to them. So it has to be a two-sided approach, really. And alhamdulillah, that was working. And I see the same thing in the mosques in this country, in the UK, that you can go into the mosque and you can come out and not speak to anyone really, or you might say Salaam alaikum to one or two, but you don't stop and talk. And to me that's a sad affair really, because how are we beginning to understand one another? How are we beginning to know who our neighbours really are? And how do we understand if there are problems which people have and what we can do for them? Or do we even notice if they don't come to the mosque? The traditional situation was that if a person missed a prayer, you go to find out what was wrong with him. In the university campus, if there wasn't in a prayer in the mosque, people would phone home and say, "Are you all right?" Okay. Some cases they'd come home to see if you were all right. But in the situation we find ourselves in today, if you don't go to the mosque, it's as if no one cares. It's not absolutely true, because there are some close friends and some close communities, but the normal situation is that no one seems to take an interest. They're too wrapped up in their own affairs. And this is not really Islam. Islam is really caring and sharing. And how do we put it into practice? We can't even talk to people. We can't even be sympathetic to people. We can't even want to understand people, even help them. And why not? Why not? Simply because we're too involved in our own affairs, and as if we can't do anything more for others. So it's as if we don't really seem to want to bother or to care, as if our own problems are so great that we can't listen to others and we can't share ours with anyone else. But this is not Islam. Islam is caring and sharing. And one of the aspects of a Muslim is that he's taught to care and share. This is what charity is all about. This is what zakat is all about. So we can't say that we don't care, because we do and we should. But do we show it in practice? Do we try to help people in the community? Do we try to understand people's problems? Do we look to see if they're there or if they're ill, and if we can help them in any way whatsoever? There is a subtle change with some of the youngsters. They are beginning to look now to even go and visit elderly people on their own. They're willing to do shopping for some people, and in fact in some cases they're willing to do a few little jobs for them, like the garden. And the other thing that's happening is that they are in fact doing some social work in terms of tidying up parks or open areas, in like picking up rubbish. And these things should be encouraged, because these are the sort of things that we can benefit the community, and we can in fact actually change the image of Muslims if we show that we're prepared to do some of these things, that we're not isolationists, that we're not apart from the community. I don't believe we can be integrated into the community personally, because I think we will always set apart in some ways, even if it's only because of Maghrib. I think the dietary requirements don't set us apart any longer, not really, because there are ways around it. But there are other things where we are set apart, and we can't change that. But in many cases we don't want to be part of the community. But even though we're Muslims, are we not part of humanity in general? And if we're part of humanity in general, why aren't we doing something for humanity, not just for ourselves? We are supposed to be the leaders. We are supposed to be showing people that we are the best people, that we are the best nation created by Allah. How do we do it? In the way we have our own petty squabbles? In the way we tend to isolate ourselves? In the way we tend to hide ourselves from public shows? We have to get out and be seen to be doing things, and we have to be doing things in the right way. We have to set an example. And once we start to do that, then maybe we can become accepted as Muslims. Because at the moment, the image which the media is projecting of us is not the right image for Muslims. We have to counteract that. And the best way we can counteract that is by everyone trying to do something for Islam, trying to do something for the Akhirah, trying to serve Allah in the way that we should as Muslims. And once we try, Allah will help us if our intentions are sincere. It's not difficult. How much do we have to do? If I say one simple thing, if we all started to tell the truth, would there be a change in our lives? Would there be a change in our relationship with non-Muslims? How would they know we're telling the truth? You might say they couldn't tell the difference. But it would show sooner or later in not only what you say and what you do, but it wouldn't show just the moment you made that change in your mind. You have to put it into practice, and you have to be seen to be practicing it, and then it will begin to show, because the actions follow whatever is in the heart. And if the heart is pure, the actions will be pure, and the intentions will be for Allah. May Allah help us all to be sincere to Him, and to do the best that we can for Him, and that we can improve the situation of Islam in our lives and in our communities with His help. Ameen. So I think I'll stop there for this episode, and inshallah we will meet again, and I leave you with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.